Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for being here tonight. On behalf of the students, faculty, Dean Aleinikoff, and the alumni, we'd like to welcome you here to our Georgetown Law Forum series on Decision 08 here at Georgetown. Before I introduce our moderator, I wanted to thank our student ambassadors who've been so important in making this event happen, and my assistant, Patrice Robinson, who has been utterly essential to all of this. Thanks to all of them. Wolf Blitzer is the anchor of CNN's Wolf Blitzer Reports, late edition with Wolf Blitzer, The Situation Room, and is the former co-anchor of The World Today. Wolf began his career in 1972 with the Reuters news agency in Tel Aviv. Shortly thereafter, he became a Washington, D.C. correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. He joined CNN in 1990 as the network's military affairs correspondent at the Pentagon. He has won numerous awards, including the 2000 award from the Chicago Press Veterans Association, the American Veteran Award's Ernie Pyle Journalism Award for Excellence in Military Reporting, and the Anti-Defamation League's Hubert H. Humphrey First Amendment Freedoms Prize, the International Platform Association's Lowell Thomas Broadcast Journalism Award for outstanding contributions to broadcast journalism, to name just a few. Wolf is the author of 2 books, Between Washington and Jerusalem, A Reporter's Notebook, and Territory of Lies. He also has written articles for numerous publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the Los Angeles Times. This is the 7th symposium that Wolf has come here to moderate for us here. And as a token of our gratitude, I've spoken with the registrar, and if he does 2 more of these, he will actually be eligible to get a law degree here at Georgetown. Something for you and Lynn to look forward to. With great thanks and appreciation, Wolf Blitzer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andy, for that nice introduction. And Dean, thank you very much for inviting me back. I enjoy coming here every year and moderating this panel. This time on a subject very close to all of our hearts, the political campaign that's going on right now. And I've covered over the years a lot of campaigns. This is one of the more exciting ones that I've covered, and I'm sure all of you are energized by what's going on, whether you're liberal or conservative, Democrat or Republican. It's an exciting time to be covering politics. And it's one of those moments in my professional career when I say to myself, thank God I didn't go to law school. No, just joking. Decided to become a journalist instead. At one point in my life, I was thinking about going to law school, and then things sort of developed in a different direction. But, the good news about going to law school is you can still become a journalist, because some of the best journalists who work at CNN, including one of my executive producers, in fact, 2 of my executive producers, they're graduates of the Georgetown University Law School. So you do have some light at the end of the tunnel. If you hate the law, journalism is a nice place to wind up. I think we probably have a few law graduates here as well. But in any case, let me introduce the panel, because we really have some outstanding journalists here who know this subject very, very, very well. And I think, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that by the time we leave here in 90 minutes or so, or whatever time we leave here, all of us will be a little smarter than we are right now based on what we're about to hear. And that's a high challenge to all of you, and I'm sure we can meet that challenge. And we'll begin at the end with Ramesh Ponnuru. He's the senior editor of the National Review. And Ramesh, I know all of us are very upset that William F. Buckley Jr., the founder and the conservative icon, passed away today. I think he was 82 years old, but he really left a major legacy, a major mark, and he was really a terrific, terrific editor and journalist. I interviewed him several times, and many, many years ago, I was once a guest on his show, The Firing Line, when he used to get into those debates with Michael Kinsley. A lot of the young people here have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's all right. The older people obviously all remember. And Maralee Schwartz is with the Washington Post. She's the deputy business editor, former national political editor. She knows this subject well indeed. Charles Krauthammer is an old friend. He's a columnist for the Washington Post. He's a frequent analyst on Fox News Channel. All of you know Charles, and you read his column in the Washington Post on Fridays. Must reading for all of us. And it's one of those columnists like E.J. Dionne, who's coming up next, where they don't just pontificate and bloviate and give us a few personal thoughts. They actually talk to people, and they give us useful information. They do some real serious reporting in the process of writing their columns, and for that all of us are always grateful, because when you read their columns, you become smarter in the process, as well as all of us will be tonight. We're going to be a lot smarter when all of this is over with. And so E.J. Dionne writes for the Washington Post. And I read here that he's a professor at Georgetown University, Public Policy Institute, senior fellow, the Brookings Institution, and a columnist for the Washington Post, and a generally very, very smart guy. You often see him on television as well. And Brian Kelly is the editor of U.S. News and World Report, who's also one of the better journalists in Washington and does a fabulous job putting that weekly magazine together under tough competition. But, you know, I read U.S. News and World Report all the time. I read Newsweek and Time as well, and I always learn something from all of those magazines. So it's great to be with all of you. And let me just throw out the first question, and I'll start with Brian, because this is in the nature of U.S. News and World Report, the political section as well. What's the biggest difference between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama on a policy, on a substantive policy issue?
I feel like Hillary Clinton. Why are you asking me the first question? I think that's
we're anti-U.S. News and World Report.
You always ask me the first question, Wolf, and it's the hardest. Let me just say I'm happy to be here and to be part of the best political team on television.
Anybody who is near me is part of that best political team on television.
And I'm only going to mention that a few more times with my remarks.
I'll say it too.
Yeah. What I'm really doing is stalling, because that is an extraordinarily difficult question, and we could probably spend the rest of our time answering it. What is the difference between these two guys?
On a policy issue. Forget about the charisma and all that other stuff. On a substantive policy issue, are there any differences? What's the real difference for undecided Democrats right now if they're looking at serious issues? What should they focus on?
Right. Well, you can look at it on an issue-by-issue basis, which may get a little tedious. Clearly, the health care plan is the one where you see some bright dividing lines. But I think, the real essence that people are looking at policy, not personality, is Hillary Clinton represents a fairly established political trend that we've seen. It is more toward the center than we've seen from the Democratic Party before. In many ways, it echoes what it was that got her husband elected. I don't see a lot of significant divergence from that. It is as much of a political policy as it is a ideological policy. In the case of Obama, I think, my view is it's unclear exactly where he is on that spectrum. And I think that's one of the things that people are wrestling with right now, is to determine, is he really more left in basic temperament and in the way he's articulated his policies. He has been fairly elusive on this front. You see people saying that you can find things in his policies that are very free market economics oriented. You look at some of his advisors, but you can find some other things that I think give people some real questions there. So, I will freely admit, as a journalist and one who is trying to manage our coverage of this, that it's an evolving picture and a moving picture. I don't see a clear distinction. We're looking for the people of Texas and Ohio in some ways to show us what that distinction is next week.
I've studied this question myself a lot. I moderated 5 presidential debates during this current cycle, and it's not easy. It's not easy to find those differences on key substantive issues. We struggled and struggled, EJ, and we came up with one that was significant. Hillary Clinton opposes granting driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. Barack Obama supports granting driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. I don't know if that's going to be a decisive issue out there for a lot of undecided Democrats, but do you have any other substantive policy differences between these two candidates?
Well, see, just to continue, I was going to say I'm honored to be part of the best political team at Georgetown Law School. So if you'd indulge me for 1 minute, Wolf, I don't want to let Bill Buckley's passing go by without mention. I wrote a column about 1.5 years ago where the first sentence was, "It is time that I confess to an illicit love. I am now and have almost always been, have been almost all my life an admirer of William F. Buckley, Jr. And I could go on and on about Buckley. I don't think anyone ever undertook a mission and carried it out with such genius or consistency in terms of building the conservative movement. I'll just read two other paragraphs from that column. If liberals are to exercise power again, they need to come to terms with Buckley's genius in understanding how ideas interact with the day-to-day needs of politics. Buckley was more intellectual than most practical politicians and more practical than most intellectuals. And my last paragraph read, my main criticism of Buckley is that he was far too effective on behalf of a movement that I think should be driven from power. And if you read that as a compliment, you're right. We will not see the likes of him for a long time, which is actually a blessing for liberals, but a great sadness for the country. So I appreciate Wolf mentioning Buckley. I think there are not large substantive differences between them, period. That National Journal looked at 888 votes they had in common, and I think they found 52 divergences. And I couldn't find a really, really important issue in that, a whole list of 52. I think it's possible that Hillary Clinton is more of a kind of realist in foreign policy and Obama is more of an idealist in foreign policy, but you wouldn't necessarily get that from every single position paper that they put out. I think the choice is on a different level. It's a manager versus a movement builder, a good poet versus a good prose writer, a different view of change, whether someone who might accommodate the prevailing political view versus someone who would try to get as much done within the framework of the currently dominant political view versus someone who might aggressively try to change that. But I doubt there are more than about 2% of the voters who are deciding this on the basis of the issues. I really think it is on this other basis, and that is a significant difference, but it's not an issue-based difference.
Charles, you see a difference between these two candidates on substance?
No. And the reason is because it doesn't exist. It's microscopic. And that's why the campaign has become entirely a matter of style and personality, and on that it's a slam dunk. And if I could just take a moment to backtrack and to thank you for having me here to say that I'm from the best political team on television, Fox News. And I appreciate having a fan in the fourth row. He could be the only conservative in this room, and I applaud his audacity and courageousness. And I do want to say a word about Buckley, because a lot of you think of him as a historical figure. He was a historic figure. And you may not know about the details of his life, but I'll tell you two things about him. He ran once for the mayoralty of New York, and he promised that if elected, the first thing he would do is demand a recount. And the other thing you might not know about him, and I think it would appeal to people of your age and cultural inclinations, I have a son of your age, is that he once sailed out into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, into international waters, in order to try marijuana legally. How can you not like a conservative like that? He was a prodigious figure, a man of intellectual capacity, which is extraordinary, and a love of intellectual combat. But his mission in life was a defense of all that was, he saw a defense and protection of what was the good in Western civilization against, and you have to remember the age he grew up in, was one in which almost the entire intellectual class of his time had been seduced by socialism and communism, and he stood up almost alone. It seems quaint now in this age, 15 years after the death of communism, but it was. It was the idea of the age, and he stood up, as he said, my job is to stand athwart history and yell stop. And he did, and by his own energy and intellect, at the time almost standing alone, he ultimately prevailed. So I mourn his loss, and I do agree with E.J. that his life will not be seen again. But to return to your question, I think it's fruitless to spend any time on this issue. Differences don't exist between them. Hillary, I think, is instinctually a centrist, like her husband. She ran early on when it was a wide field and Obama hadn't emerged. As a centrist, she had positioned herself in the Senate by joining armed services and others as a person who was reliable on national defense, shoring up accusations of normally hurled at the people on the left, supporting the war, and then instead of running as a centrist all the way through, when Obama emerged, she panicked, ran left, and once she ran left, she had no way to actually compete with him. If she had stayed in the center, she would have had arguments about the war and the surge, arguments about economic issues, argument about NAFTA, which she has abandoned as an example. She has none. So it's all a matter of personality, and she has no chance in competing with him.
Let me bring Maralee in to this discussion. They spent in the debate last night the first 16 minutes or so fighting over health care, their respective programs. Hillary Clinton says she wants universal health care, health insurance. And she says Barack Obama does not, that 20 million Americans would be left out of his proposal. Is this a real difference, or is it a marginal difference between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama on an issue, health care for Americans, that's obviously a very important one?
You know, I think this tends to be one more of perception. The idea that for the group she is targeting, who feel so fragile about health care, this may be very reassuring. But on a more intellectual analysis, there is very little difference, because while he doesn't have the same mandate she has, he's got his penalty option. And in essence, that's the mandate. So it's, again, a rhetorical and perception difference. And, you know, if you looked at it on paper, it might look, there might be, well, this doesn't quite parse with this. But after you get to the bottom of the piece of paper, it's pretty much the same. And I think it was such a... It was a struggle for her to keep explaining this relentless effort to explain every little difference. And do you think most of the people out there could understand? It got so technical, and it played to, you know, what many people see as her great wonk strength and his less wonk strength. But for the voters that they're trying to reach out there, I just don't think that's was very persuasive. Does
everybody agree that on health care that their differences are marginal?
Well, I think the mandate's important. I actually think she's right on the mandate, in the sense that you can't have a health plan that's not single payer or something that holds together if you don't require everybody to get it, including healthy people. On the other hand, as a practical matter, if either of them became president, I'm not sure that the plan they put on the table now will resemble the plan that will emerge even 5 days later. And I think politically there's a case that it might be easier to start without the mandate and get there. So in that sense, I can see the political value of Obama's position, but I think on the merits, if we ever do a plan anything like the ones they are proposing, you have to end up with a mandate.
Ramesh, what do you think?
Well, first of all, let me thank everybody for saying such nice things about my friend Bill Buckley. It's sort of, it's only been a few hours, so I can't quite think of him in the past tense yet, but I appreciate that a lot. On this question about the differences on healthcare, so many of them, they melt just as soon as you put any focus on them. Obama has a mandate for children's health care. He said that he would be willing to step in with mandates if he doesn't achieve the kind of universality that he wants to achieve. He's accused her of being willing to garnish wages to achieve his mandate, but he's, in the fine print, willing to do the exact same thing. So I don't think there's any difference. What I think is interesting in the positions of the Democratic Party and how little daylight there is the extent to which on domestic economic issues they are the new Democratic consensus is to the left of the Democratic consensus during the 1990s under Bill Clinton's presidency on trade, on entitlements, on health care, or at least to the left of the post-1994 Democratic consensus on health care, and arguably, I think, also on taxes.
So this populist notion that's emerging among the Democratic candidates, certainly we heard it from John Edwards when he was a presidential candidate. Will that change, Ramesh, once one of these two candidates becomes the Democratic nominee, and then they have to start thinking in terms of a general election as opposed to winning a Democratic nomination?
Well, I think a lot of Democrats believe, and I think there's a lot of evidence to back them up, that this populism is not just a winning primary message, but a winning general election message. And they can look at a lot of the battleground states, and particularly places like Ohio and Pennsylvania and other places like Wisconsin, Iowa, and think that an anti-trade message in particular is going to have a lot of appeal to economically stressed and anxious middle-income and lower middle-income workers.
You agree, Brian, with that, that they're basically going to continue that populist message that we're hearing right now in a general election against John McCain?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree. I mean, I think what Ramesh says is true, but it is a high-risk strategy. I mean, I still think, you're fundamentally looking at a country that is in a 50-50 split. I don't see anything radically different from where we've been the last times we've been down this road, and it is fundamentally a centrist, even a center-right country. The Democrats are betting that there's perhaps a shift in the wind here. So far they have. And that's where I think Obama becomes an interesting candidate, and what I said before about his positions that are a little bit supple and maybe in a good way. What EJ says about the health care plan, for instance, he can pivot into a more free market orientation on health care, which may be a much better place to be. For the Democrats, the question you have to look at, I think, with Obama is this the George McGovern versus Muskie campaign, where he suddenly surges to the front in the primaries and follows that course all the way down the road and loses in a landslide, or is there some other shift that's going to take place here? And again, from my perspective, I don't see the clear signals on that. I do see him positioned to go in a couple of different ways.
Anybody else want to weigh in on this?
This may sound both naive and pragmatic, but
That's a pretty good combination.
Well, you sound like a Democrat.
Well, I'm actually talking about the Democrats, so maybe that's why. I tend to think, but this factors in McCain, I tend to think at the end of the day, voters want, when they're placing that vote, they want to choose the person that is going to bring them the result, that the agenda, the result of the agenda that they most desire, whether it be health care or not cutting taxes or changes in climate policy. And where I think Obama, should he be the nominee, may have some challenges is that how much will people trust that he can fulfill that desire for a result?
Could I just... I just want to say something about the economics. I think they're different from the 90s because we're not in the 90s anymore. I mean, that at the end of the 90s, income was going up at the top, it was going up in the middle, it was going up at the bottom, and the poverty rate was coming down. You're now in a situation where income has continued to go up at the top until maybe the last 6 months, but it was not going up in the middle, and the poverty rate was going up. The bottom was really suffering. Wages have stagnated, partly because so much compensation is now going into healthcare premiums. People who do not have college degrees, and especially people who do not have high school degrees, are having more and more trouble finding jobs that pay the kind of wages that those same kinds of people made before, particularly in a state like Ohio. And so I don't think it's at all surprising that both Clinton and Obama are speaking more critically about the state of the economy. And on trade, I think the issue there is that every time one of these trade agreements passed, people said incomes will go up. Those who don't go up, we'll compensate them. We'll figure out some way to lift them up. And the second half, that promise was never fully kept. So there's more resentment about trade now than there was before. But no one's talking about Smoot-Hawley. We're not talking about raising barriers. At most, what they're talking about is let's think let's take a pause in a way as we look at the free trade regime and what do we want to do next, as opposed to let's shut everything down. That's not.
Well, they both did say last night of the debate that if they were elected president, they would go to Canada and Mexico and say, you know what, this NAFTA thing is not working. We need to amend it. We need to negotiate a new deal. Otherwise, we're dropping out in 6 months, which the treaty allows them to do that. That's a pretty significant step that they're going to go to Mexico and Canada and say, let's renegotiate this carefully crafted arrangement. EJ.
Well, first of all, they were pressed hard to say they drop out and decided that they had to say drop out in response to the question, where their emphasis is they want to open it up. And even Clinton, in late Clinton, the vogue had already moved to, if we're going to do new trade agreements, we need to talk about environmental standards and labor standards and that sort of thing. So I'm not sure it's as radical a shift as it sounded like. And
Charles,
obviously they are running in Ohio, a state where NAFTA is deeply unpopular, and it's not unheard of for politicians to try to appeal to a particular electorate at a particular time.
Yeah, but it's dangerous because you get trapped in your rhetoric and your promises. And to say that they were pressed in a debate is no excuse. You know, you're in the big leagues, you get depressed, and you're either going to threaten a withdrawal out of NAFTA or you don't. And they did. I thought it was astonishing. I mean, pulling out of NAFTA is the Smoot-Hawley of our day. That would be a remarkable reversal of free trade. It would be the beginning of unraveling of all of our trade agreements. If it's not going to be with Mexico and Canada, it's not going to be with Panama and South Korea. So I was rather astonished when I heard that, and I think it is a sign of the Democrats, at least the two leading remaining candidates, and if you throw in, of course, John Edwards, have moved radically left, as contrasted with the Clinton administration of the 90s, which was classically a centrist. The two major achievements of the Clinton administration in social policy were the abolition of welfare, a remarkable achievement, courageous act, an incredible success, and NAFTA. And the way you hear his wife speaking about it and her opponent speaking about it, they're ready to throw NAFTA overboard in a populist wave, which I think will hurt the country. It was also interesting that Obama, when he was asked about immigration in the last debate, said, well, you know, we ought to reconsider the building of the fence and all these other issues. And then he said, of course, one of the real answers is to strengthen the economy of Mexico. Well, he wants to abolish NAFTA and strengthen the economy of Mexico. Of course, one of the main arguments in favor of NAFTA is that it creates opportunity and jobs and openness and a modern economy in Mexico, which in fact it has been doing, which in the long run is the best and the most humane answer against illegal immigration in the South. So it shows you how he hadn't quite thought out the contradictions between two of his planks.
Ramesh, let me just get you on this point. As far as NAFTA is concerned, I don't think there's any doubt that manufacturing jobs, old kind of manufacturing jobs, have been lost since NAFTA became the law. On the other hand, there have been a creation of high-tech jobs, information-related jobs, new kinds of economic opportunities that have created a lot of new jobs. I interviewed the governor of Pennsylvania today, Ed Rendell, and he said, in his state, I said, you want to get rid of NAFTA? He said, no. He said, some parts of Pennsylvania have seriously struggled. Those cities where they lost a lot of economic manufacturing jobs, but other parts of Pennsylvania have gained because of new jobs that have come in as a result of NAFTA. Has NAFTA been a net plus or a net minus for the United States?
Well, I mean, I think that the debate over this question is somewhat overblown. I think it's very hard to make the case that it's had a huge effect either way. I think it's been a modest benefit to the country, and a lot of the debate is about the symbolism. Do we want to continue with the free trade consensus that has prevailed in this country from the 1940s onward or not? And I think, you know, I mean, it's very hard also to make the case that, you know, the South Korea deal or Peruvian deal, that these things are all that important, certainly in relation to our economy. But but the question is, are we going to start slowing down our liberalization of trade and maybe even reverse it at some point, or are we going to continue it? I think that's the question. Let me just, if I could, just say one more thing about the Obama versus Clinton race. And by the way, Wolf, when you started out your first question by saying, forget about the charisma, I think you've come up with the Clinton campaign slogan. We might see it come up here in the next few days.
Some people think she has a lot of charisma.
Well, I guess they're just not showing up to vote. I think you can trace sort of lineal descent from the McGovern coalition to the Gary Hart coalition to the Bill Bradley coalition to Obama, and then on the other side, Hubert Humphrey to Mondale to Al Gore to Clinton. And the two great weaknesses of the sort of the McGovern-Hart-Bradley coalition have been, one, in the primaries, that coalition has had limited appeal to African American voters. Not a problem this time. At least once Obama actually emerged. And second, the other weakness has been in a general election, that coalition and that style of candidate has had limited appeal to white working class voters. That, I think, is still a potential problem for Barack Obama, and that's the reason why one of the reasons I answered that question about the continuation of economic populism into the general election the way I did. I think that's going to be a group of voters that Obama is going to have to try very hard to hold on to.
I agree with that. I just want to make one point quickly, which is I am really struck over the last few weeks at how many of the people who wanted to impeach Bill Clinton now speak so nostalgically about how wonderful his economic policies were whenever they want to criticize the existing Democratic candidates. An astonishing conversion you're seeing on the right. I just thought that was worth noting.
They're even worse than Clinton. That's what I'm saying.
Go ahead. You could respond. There was one other thing I wanted to say, but go ahead.
No, well, then I'll hit you twice. Go ahead and say
you hit me. You can hit me twice. The other thing is we're acting as if, NAFTA, I agree with Ramesh's point that it is not the most important thing that's happened in the American economy. It is part of a more general attitude toward whether free trade has worked. But I really do think the frustrations in all those parts of Pennsylvania and Ohio and other parts of the country where there's been real harm, it's tended to be these trade agreements tend to hit hardest at the least well-off people outside the service economy in the best-off economies. And that's the challenge of free trade, is that a lot of people in the richer countries who aren't rich are the ones who often pay the price. And that what we're looking for is a redress of these grievances. I think the argument over NAFTA is partly symbolic, but it's real in the sense that those folks who have been hurt are demanding compensation, and that's what Clinton and Obama and John Edwards before them were talking about.
Reduction in consumer prices disproportionately benefits low-income people as well, though.
Right. But E.J., compensation isn't saying we're going to stop the treaty. Compensation is helping these displaced workers get new jobs or health benefits or retraining. And that's why I have so much problem with this debate about if only NAFTA were not around.
But I think the argument is NAFTA didn't keep its full promise to us or to the Mexicans, and that's why it's under debate.
Free trade is not a panacea. It never does. But, I mean, it's my friend Mike Kinsley, who incidentally was a lawyer who became a journalist, so there is a future, who was an economist who said the only thing in political science that you can show to be mathematically true is that free trade works. Overall, as an aggregate, it works. It was shown by Adam Smith, and it's not hard to demonstrate mathematically. The problem is that the ones who benefit, which is lower consumer prices and exports, are generally undefinable. It's the general mass of the population. And those who are hurt are individuals who are definable. So as a political issue, it's easier to argue against because you can locate the factory that shut down and those who have suffered as a result. And you can't locate consumers who benefit from the low prices of shirts at Walmart, who are able to afford a level of standard of living which was impossible without free trade 20 or 30 or 40 years ago.
All right,
and the balance in politics is to try to find how to compensate and mitigate those who lose, but overall it's mathematically demonstrable that in the aggregate it helps both of the parties in free trade. And I would just add one item on your question about Hillary and Obama and their strategy. Her strategy essentially is she's running against hope and eloquence, and it's not working.
All right, we're going to move to the second question right now. We're going to start with Brian once again. I think the panel has...
There you go again.
Because you know what? We're anti-U.S. News and World Report. So we're going to give him the first question once again, and then we'll go down the table. Here's the question. Most of you agree that the differences on substantive issues between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are minor. So the question is this. What's the biggest substantive difference on an important issue between one of these two Democratic candidates who will be the Democratic nominee and John McCain?
The war in Iraq. I mean, both candidates have said they would take the troops out immediately, and McCain has said he'll keep them there for 100 years. So that tends to set a pretty broad parameter there.
So it's an average of 50 years.
So I think that issue, and that's where, you know, I think, and to Charles's point earlier, I think that there is some danger of drawing some extremely bright lines that you may have to defend in a general election. But certainly McCain has been extremely consistent on that. Whichever the Democrats comes in is going to have to deal with Iraq, and as McCain said, that he thinks Iraq is the whole issue.
So that will be the biggest issue once the Democratic political dust settles between the Democratic candidate and McCain.
Well, I think in terms of that bright line, that will be there. The other side of it, the other big issue will be the economy, and I think that was the other thing.
All right, so let's talk about both of these. Let's first go down the table and see if the rest of the panel agrees. EJ.
Yeah, I think it's Iraq, possibly Iran, healthcare, and taxes, and then more generally the economy. But I think the economy will get argued about quite a bit through their attitudes toward healthcare and government's role in it, in their attitudes toward whether taxes on the wealthy should go up. And it is going to be a very clear choice. And I don't think, looking at an Obama-McCain race, it could be a relatively clean choice in the sense that at least to this point, neither of them arouses the opposition from the other side that other candidates might have. And I think what you may see, this is the non-Karl Rove election, that in recent elections the middle was very small because voters didn't find it easy to get to one side or the other. Both parties were running 51, 52% strategies. In this election, I think the middle is quite big, and that you could have 20% of the vote or more up for grabs. And I think that's going to make for a very interesting dynamic.
But if I just real quick, when I say the economy, though, I don't mean policy. I mean the state of the economy. I think the two great unknowns are the state of
we're going to get to that in a moment.
And the state of the economy. Those are the two evolving things, and how the candidates deal with them.
So when Ralph Nader or others suggest, there isn't really a whole lot of difference between the Democrats and John McCain, Charles?
Well, then he needs help.
Yeah.
He's unemployed. He's bored. And he's growing older. He only has so many campaigns he can join. No, the differences would be rather stark. Obama he's a great charismatic figure, but if you look at the voting record, National Journal and others, he is, in the way he's acted in the Senate, a conventional, ordinary, uninteresting liberal in that sense. I mean, if you want, I think David DeBrooks had written, if you want to know how he voted in the Senate, you could have a People for the American Way computer program. It would generate his votes. And McCain is, interestingly, he's not a Reagan Republican. He has a lot of opposition among the right and the Republican Party. And the reason is that he is a centrist Republican. Obama is a conventional liberal. I think what's really interesting is, as Ramesh had noted, the Democrats have shifted to left, and the Republicans have as well. It started not with McCain, but with George W. Bush, compassionate conservative. McCain is attacked on the right for his heresies on immigration, campaign to finance reform. Well, Bush signed the latter, and he was pushing hard on the former. Bush is the one who introduced a new entitlement in the drug benefit in Medicare. He's the guy who nominated Harriet Miers, who's not exactly a stalwart of conservative judicial thinking. So with Bush, you get a change. Reaganism is abandoned, and it moves to the center, which is why I think McCain it'll be an interesting campaign between a Republican candidate who is more centrist running against a Democratic candidate who's more left, but has incredible and remarkable personal appeal. But on the question of issues, the war in Iraq and the war on terror are going to be number one, and it'll be extremely interesting to see how it develops. As you know, there was a contretemps between them today over the war. McCain had a sound debate in which he ridiculed Obama for saying that if al-Qaeda returned into Iraq, he would perhaps re-invade or exercise American military options. And he said, I have news for Senator Obama. Al-Qaeda's already in Iraq. And Obama responded in a speech I think he gave in Texas. I have news for Senator McCain. Until you invaded Iraq, Al-Qaeda wasn't in Iraq. So the shape of this Iraq debate is forming. Obama is going to say, I was right in 2002, and McCain is going to say, well, what are you going to do in 2009?
Maralee?
Well, I think we've pretty much covered the major issues. There'll obviously be the social issues will come forward at some point. Abortion, gay marriage, the future of the Supreme Court, those will all play out as each side tries to rally its base.
Because there are real significant differences on gays and serving openly in the military, for example.
Yes.
All of the Republican candidates opposed that. All of the Democratic candidates supported it. I remember when I did that back-to-back debate in New Hampshire, the Democrats one day, the Republicans the day afterwards, and those are the days when we used to ask the candidates to raise their hands, because there were 8 of them on the stage at any one time. It's a lot easier moderating a debate when there are 2 as opposed to 8, and that was a stark difference on these social issues, abortion rights, gay rights, and things along that manner.
But they will agree on evolution, thank God.
Yes, creationism will not separation, yes.
Ramesh?
Well, I actually don't agree that I don't believe that the Iraq War is going to be the top issue in the fall. I don't think the election is going to turn on foreign policy. I'm not even sure that it's going to turn on the economy, at least as conventionally defined. I don't think that the question of sort of growth rates and are we in a recession or not. Well, let me just put it this way: we could have an economy that everybody has agreed by the fall has maybe narrowly missed a recession, and is maybe even on path for higher growth. But the party in power, the Republicans, could still lose over health care. I really do think that health care is going to be the top issue, and that to the extent that the economy is, it's really a matter of sort of middle-class economic security, and healthcare is the single biggest public policy issue that's related to that. I think there's a real contrast.
All right, so explain the biggest difference on healthcare between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama on the one hand, and John McCain on the other, assuming this becomes a big issue. What are their respective arguments?
Well, John McCain has a more small government and free market approach that relies partly on deregulation of insurance markets, partly on providing tax credits to people who are purchasing insurance on their own instead of getting it through the workforce. I myself think it's a very solid plan. I'm not 100% sure that McCain is aware of its existence. And he doesn't do a whole lot of talking about it, but maybe he'll meet his campaign policy advisors at some point, and they'll inform him of it. On the Democratic side, you have where I say the Republicans are more focused on things like portability of insurance between jobs, on reducing costs, that kind of thing. The Democratic focus is much more on increasing coverage rates and restructuring private markets through new regulations and, where necessary in their view, relying on public provision of health insurance to fill those gaps. And really they've set those sort of 100% as the ultimate goal.
You see, I did a little piece today on my blog at cnnpolitics.com which all of you, I'm sure, read all the time. And I said this, I said, assuming that the war in Iraq sort of stays between now and November where it is right now, and assuming there's no major terrorist incident, another 9/11, God forbid, against the United States, either here or someplace around the world, all the polls, the exit polls that we do, show that the economy right now is the number one issue for Democrats and Republicans. And so I threw out this, I said if the economy, if in November people are, as they are right now, very worried about losing their jobs, very worried about health care, whether they have health insurance or not, very worried about inflation, very worried about the possibility of a recession, or a huge percentage of the American public already believes we're in a recession, even if the technical definition that economists have is not necessarily in play yet. And the polls that show you, is the country going in the right direction or wrong direction? How confident are you? If there's a deep amount of concern out there in November, as there is right now, I suspect we could see a situation, and I'm anxious to hear what you guys think of what happened in 1992, when you had an incumbent president, George Herbert Walker Bush, coming on the heels of a great win in 91 when the U.S. sent 500,000 troops to the Gulf, liberated Kuwait from Saddam Hussein's occupation. By the end of 91, early 92, it was the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of 70 years of communist rule in Russia and the other republics of the Soviet Union. His job approval numbers were extraordinary. But then as 92 came along, the economy seemed to deteriorate. And all of a sudden, Bill Clinton, a former governor of Arkansas, a small state, with not a whole lot of foreign policy experience, if any at all, other than being a Rhodes Scholar in England at one point in his life, all of a sudden he beats George Herbert Walker Bush because of the economy and that slogan that James Carville and Paul Begala put forward, it's the economy, stupid. And so I wonder if that same kind of, and I'll throw the question out to Charles, if that same kind of mentality could take place this year. If people are worried about the economy, will they go with the experience of a John McCain, or will they go with the hope and the notion of change in a Barack Obama, let's say, assuming he gets the Democratic nomination?
Well, I think it's a perfect analogy, and I think it is that kind of choice. And the question is, what is the circumstance and the psychological environment in which it's happening? I think you could not have had the election of a Clinton, as you say, a governor untested, without any experience in foreign affairs, if you had not had the collapse of the Soviet Union and its disappearance, almost a miraculous event, a year earlier. It was only in the post-Cold War world, it was only in a year, the first year, in 60 years, in which the United States was living in a world without an existential threat. This is after 6 decades of challenge by fascism and Nazism and communism, where America essentially had its existence, its way of life on the line. It was the first year of relief, and it was a decade, an unusual decade. I've called it a holiday from history, between the fall of the Soviet Union in December 1991 and September 11th, a decade later, in which we existed in the absence of an existential threat. And that was an unusual time. That's why you could get the election of an untested and unproven governor. I've long thought that given the world that we live in now, post 9/11, where we know there are people out there who want to destroy us and who are trying to acquire the means to do it, demonstrated it on 9/11, that it would be impossible to elect a novice like a Barack Obama in this atmosphere. And I'm not sure I'm right anymore, because I think the success of the Bush administration, I know that phrase will sound odd in this environment, but it is one that is undeniable, and history will say it, the remarkable success, unbelievable success in not having had a second attack in, 6 or 7 years, which no one in Washington expected. No one thought we'd go 6 months or a year without a second attack. It's the absence of a second attack, which I think history will record as remarkable and historic. But that, of course, has induced a psychological state in the country in which we are now forgetting. And I think we now have an atmosphere in which the Republican success in stopping terrorism through all kinds of means has now sort of politically left the Republican Party in a position where the country, apart from not being grateful or at least aware of what's happened, I mean, it's the existence of a non-event, and a non-event does not have the political impact of an event. The absence of an event is what I think is remarkable, but I'm not sure it is strong enough to actually sway this election. So I'm now beginning to think that in this lull, and I think it's a lull because Al-Qaeda or Iran or Pakistan is going to go really south at some point. In this lull, we may actually elect a president who is not prepared, or at least who doesn't have preparation. So I think it could be a repeat of 92.
What do you think, EJ?
I think it would be a historic mistake.
I almost agree with Charles, but not quite.
Well, then I may have to reconsider.
I thought so. Yeah, it was one way of getting you to change your mind. I agree with the best political blog on television that the 92 metaphor is actually, I think, quite good. And I think one of the ironies of the primaries, by the way, is that Barack Obama read this moment the way Bill Clinton read 92, and I think he was well suited for this moment, and ran a campaign well suited for this moment in the same way Bill Clinton ran 92. Where I agree with Charles is it is significant that we have not had another terrorist attack, and I do think that has an effect. The one piece of the story that I think Charles left out, although he will disagree with me and be reassured, is that there's something else that happened, which is the Iraq War, and that I think that the Republicans do not have the kind of automatic credibility on foreign policy that they might have enjoyed. Indeed, even in 92, if voters were voting on foreign policy, there just weren't enough of them for George Bush, the first President Bush. They did vote for him. And I think after Iraq, there are many Americans who look at this administration, at our standing in the world, and say, we don't like that foreign policy. Those guys actually don't know what they're doing. So the reason somebody has the reason Obama has an opening, or someone, or the Democrats, is because there is a great deal of opposition to the way the Republicans have handled foreign policy. If the Republicans had been simply purely successful in foreign policy and perceived that way, then I don't think the opening would be as great as it is now.
You know, just one quick add-on to that.
I actually agree with that.
Not only has Obama run the Clinton 92 campaign in some ways, but Hillary's run the Clinton 96 campaign. Yes. The strategic problem being that nobody apparently told her that she's not the incumbent president.
But there's a lot to that.
And nobody told her that Bob Dole is not necessarily the opponent as he was in 96. So, Brian, what do you think?
Well, I think you compound that with the fact that I think, and anybody would conclude, even if you're a fan of McCain's, that the economy is not his strong suit. He's very unsure on his feet. Anytime I've ever seen him speak about it, he made a offhand, speaking the truth inadvertently the other day, and said, well, I should do more of this. And this is a guy who jokes about graduating fifth from the bottom of his class at Annapolis, and I don't even think he took economics there. The ability to be able to speak coherently and facilely in economics going forward with what's going to be a very uncertain climate. I mean, this is potentially not 92 in a sense that may be much worse. I mean, we're looking at storm clouds of the financial system that are gathering of a capacity that we probably haven't seen in some ways since before the Depression. And is this just a wringing out of the excess that mostly affects investment bankers and people with two homes? Maybe. But you have the possibility of millions of people literally, having to walk away from their homes in the summer. And where do these people live? Well, a lot of them live in Florida. A lot of them live in Nevada. So you've got a political map that overlays the economic map, which is very, I would think from the Republican perspective, is very troublesome. And remember, again, it wasn't the economy, stupid, that was really the driving force here. That was the internal campaign slogan. The Clinton genius was, I feel your pain. And he articulated that in so many ways. He understood that. And you know, John McCain is one of those guys who doesn't sort of project that sense of feeling your pain, whereas you look at Obama and you think, wow, you know, this guy really knows how to do it. So, you know, on that score, I think you do have to think that things are tilting a little bit to the 92 model.
Maralee, what do you think?
Well, I was very much of Charles' mindset about this campaign and comparing it to 92. I thought that Obama, while offering the Clinton vision, the Clinton elegance and excitement, because we're in a post-9/11 world, that the need for experience might actually trump that. And I thought that would work to Mrs. Clinton's advantage. And there's still a part of me that thinks it gives McCain not an advantage in a large way, but still an advantage. And where I do disagree is that even though we have not had any attacks on our homeland, it's a really scary world. And the potential, for me, I think always is out there existing, where I am surprised that, and now have learned why some of this has not, this viewpoint of mine has, about experiencing being fearful, has not penetrated.
Well, let me press you on that point. If and God forbid, there is a major terrorist, 9/11 or worse, against the United States, does that guarantee John McCain's election?
I don't know that it guarantees it, but I certainly think it changes the dynamic a lot. What I had thought was that psychologically that worked to his advantage, but I just spent a semester with students even younger than you, teaching a study group at Harvard, and I was just stunned at the lack of, I mean, their priority is climate change, is education. Iraq and the economy were just never brought up. This is obviously a rather liberal campus. And although there was a good group of McCain supporters that were in my classes, but there is this sense of not feeling threatened. And that then goes back to Charles's sense of the lull. And it is this message that I think is energizing Obama and making it a more successful message than I would have expected with the lack of experience in what I think is a scary world.
I would agree entirely, but I would point out that the reason why it probably didn't work in the primaries is because in the Democratic electorate, which is, of course, a liberal electorate, you would have far less of this sense of danger and apprehension about foreign threats than you would in a general election, which is why I think McCain has a chance. I think the winds are very heavily Democratic this year, and the odds are very strongly with McCain. I think he's got about as much a chance as the Giants had against the Patriots.
And while I don't think Iraq is the sort of
that's painful, Charles,
the dramatic issue that it was, I do think Iraq is frozen in voters' minds, and for the most part, it's frozen as a very bad thing.
All right, we're going to take some questions from you. We have microphones here, and I want to hear from all of you. But let me just throw out one final thing, then we'll go to the audience and hear what you have to say in succinct questions, please. The general thought is that people vote for who the presidential candidate is, and they really don't care that much about the vice presidential candidate. Terry McAuliffe, who's the national chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign, once again today suggested that so-called dream team, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama on the same ticket, unclear who's number one, who's number two, but on the same ticket, that would energize the Democratic Party, and it would be a great, great thing. I'll start and go around the panel right now and ask, is that possible that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama will be on the same ticket this year?
No.
EJ?
If Clinton's, for some reason, managed to pull the nomination out, which looks like a long shot, I think she would need Obama to pull the party together. But if Obama gets a nomination, I don't think he would pick Hillary Clinton.
Charles?
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
You agree with EJ?
As much as it pains me to agree with EJ. He's right on the mark.
Well, I agree with Charles.
Complete consensus here. I think Obama's already on the ticket. Whether Clinton's on the ticket's in doubt and unlikely.
And you notice I asked the first question too? Brian. All right, whoever's got a question, please come to the microphone and ask your question. And please introduce yourself too.
My name is Mike Sachs. I'm a 1L here. And I have a question primarily directed towards Mr. Krauthammer, but it's open for everyone. So in 2000, Bush won during a security lull, untested. And in 2004, Bush won based on security. If 9/11 had happened, say, on Gore's watch, and he went through the same steps, invaded a country uninvolved with 9/11, and then opened up a hornet's nest of all sorts of security problems, would he have been reelected on security, and would you guys have championed him as a man who is protecting us? Follow up on that, if another attack does happen, as you guys are impugning, on a Democratic candidate who might be similarly untested as, say, a George W. Bush in 2000, will you guys give him the same support as our protector in the 2012 election?
Well, I rarely answer a third-order hypothetical, particularly if it's presented tendentiously. I'm not sure I follow. I think the fact that Clinton was elected twice and Bush, these were two untested governors, was unusual, and it happened precisely in that lull, that holiday from history. I remember writing in the late 90s that we were living in a golden age, an impossible age, and that I had a sense that it had to be temporary. You remember there was, well, you may not remember, there was a famous article by Fukuyama, The End of History, and I thought it was an interval in history. And it was so, if you didn't grow up in the Cold War, hiding under a desk with air raids, you have no idea what it felt to live in those 50 years of possible imminent extinction. And for it to, and I never expected, I don't know anybody of my age who expected it would ever end. I thought I would live and die and see the Cold War and the struggle against communism continue. And that it should have ended, and ended without a shot fired. And not only with an armistice in the Cold War, or a surrender in the Cold War, but a disappearance of the enemy was an event of biblical proportions. It was in that interval in the 90s in which we took a chance on governors, and you could say it was a return to American normality, that the 60 years of the struggle in the 30s until the end of the 80s against totalitarianism was unusual in our history, and that our first century and a half had been our normal era, in which we didn't have this kind of Damocles sword hanging over us. So I found that you had these chance-taking political events in the 90s as a way to deal with a new normality, which is now gone. Now, I'm not sure Americans see it my way, and they may look at, and I think the entire Democratic electorate looks at 9/11 as an aberration. You know, a small group of terrorists who finally had a fluke success. It hasn't been repeated. We exaggerated the threat. We have now, by invading Iraq, created new enemies and stoked the fire. And if we were to withdraw from Iraq, reducing any Americanism, smile at the world and make nice, it'll become, terrorism will be a nuisance and not a threat. So I think that's the divide in the electorate, and McCain will have to make the argument that, in fact, it's different. And I'm not sure who'd win that debate in a general election.
There was a little bit of surplus ire that was directed my way, so if I could just do a quick answer on that. First of all, just as a matter of straight political analysis, I have no problem conceding that if September 11th had been September 11th, 2000, Al Gore would have won the election in 2000. That just seems to me an obvious point. On the sort of advocacy point, look, my colleagues and I supported Bill Clinton's intervention in Kosovo and criticized a lot of Republicans for their sort of idiotic knee-jerk opposition to it. We supported Clinton's intervention in Iraq in 1998. In fact, we supported it more vigorously than he, in fact, acted. So I think I would defend myself and my colleagues from the charge of simple partisanship.
Actually, a lot of conservatives said that the Iraq attack was wag the dog, and that if you can go back and find an awful lot of criticism.
The 98 attack.
The 98 attack. Just to give it some context, it was taking place right at the height of the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Just on Charles's point, very briefly, I'd amend the end of what Charles said significantly. I don't think liberals. I think liberals do not view 9/11 as the product of a gigantic new ideological movement. I think they do view it as reflecting a kind of failed brand of Islam. However, I think they take the terrorist threat seriously, but they would assert that the invasion of Iraq was not a good idea, was not a response to this, has weakened us in Afghanistan, and it doesn't come from some fuzzy-headed, if only we're nice, the world will like us view. It comes from a very different judgment about where American interests lie.
I interviewed William F. Buckley in 2004, the last interview I did with him on CNN, and we looked at the tape today. And it was in that interview right after he wrote a long article, and Ramesh will know this, in which he basically said, correct me if I'm wrong, that if he knew in 2002 and 2003 what he knew in 2004, he would have never supported invading Iraq and going to war against Saddam Hussein. So William F. Buckley, was saying those kinds of things, which was, I thought, from his perspective, obviously very significant.
If we had known in 1943 that the invasion of North Africa was an entire waste of time and American lives, we wouldn't have done it. You make your judgments in history when they happen, and you take the consequences. In all of our wars, Americans have a long history, all the way back to the Revolutionary War, of getting it wrong at the beginning. We didn't sort of get it right in the Second World War until the second year. The Civil War was a disaster until the last year. Revolutionary War was a disaster for almost a decade. So it's not as if it's new in American history. I think what's interesting, remarkable, and surprising is that in the war in Iraq, it took us 3 years, but we have found a strategy and a general that actually work. And the question, I think, in this election is going to be, now that that's happened, are you going to now retreat and let it all fall apart, or are you going to continue and possibly succeed?
Let's take another question.
Hi, my name is Adam Schwartz, and I'm an admitted student here for the law school. And my question is actually about this idea that this is like a 1992. We all discussed how it's like that. And I actually want to, I think it's, and I would like to hear, and I throw this out to all of you, I think it actually seems much more like 1980 when Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States. Ronald Reagan won, I believe, 48 of the states. He swept the country. He created a new political coalition where he drew millions of new people into the Republican Party. And he created, I think, a conservative movement that has lasted now for about 30 years, which I know we talk about these political cycles that last about 30 years, and it seems a ripe opportunity for a new one. With all that said, with 15 million to 10 million voters in the primaries, Democrat to Republican, with so many new people getting involved because of the Obama campaign, do you think this is a situation where we could see Obama, not a 50-50, or maybe Ohio, maybe Florida election, but maybe a situation where Obama could sweep the country?
The great thing about historical metaphors is you could believe in more than one at once. And I do think that certainly an Obama account would look at it that way. I view this election as potentially 60-40 either way. In other words, I agree with the premise that you're suggesting, because I do think, and again, this goes to Bill Buckley's career. Bill Buckley, over many years, created a set of ideas which led to the creation of a conservative movement, which, after a period of liberal failure, was prepared to take power under Ronald Reagan, and found a charismatic leader in Ronald Reagan who was very effective at putting forward these ideas. That is the liberal dream with Obama. That's why Obama, I think if you ask why are people voting for Obama, a lot of them are voting for him on precisely the basis of that if I may use the word hope. And I think that you are at the end of a long conservative era. I believe that devoutly conservatives are going to have to go back to the drawing boards the way liberals had to before. And so that opportunity exists. But we can't know that that's going to happen. And I do think that McCain is probably the best alternative candidate. They want to run this election as if it's Eisenhower versus Stevenson and turn Obama into Stevenson, not Reagan. And so you'll have a war over, so we'll add a metaphor here. And I think that's what they're going to try to do. But I think that the promise that you're suggesting is a realistic possibility.
But I think it's also, this gets to the substance question. By this point in the campaign in 1980, Reagan had set forth some very clear principles that he had held to for many years in his life, and had made a very clear distinction. The way we are conducting business as usual isn't working. And you also had an underlying problem in the economy. I would point that out. That was a whole separate issue that was brewing. You had a lot of very unhappy people. So never, in my view, never discount the economy. But Reagan articulated some very clear things. In the case of Obama, he's relatively a blank slate on that front right now. Could he rally people? Could he articulate a new vision of the way the world, the U.S. should be running? Perhaps, but we haven't seen that.
Well, he is rallying people, but it is not...
Emotionally,
he is a phenomenon, and he's drawing new people, as you said, into the campaign universe, but it is not on ideas.
Right. I disagree. I think that assumes there is...
But not sort of really concrete.
This will be part of the debate of the election. I think part of the question is there a reasonably coherent set of liberal or progressive ideas that Obama stands for? I think the answer is yes. Now, Charles might argue they're conventional and all the rest of it, but that doesn't mean there isn't a body of ideas there. Ronald Reagan had a conventional conservative worldview that looked very exciting given the problems that the country faced in 1980.
But that's not why people are fainting in the audience. I mean, that's not why the country's in the middle of a national swoon of the kind. You and I remember Trudeau mania in the 1960s. Both of us grew up in Canada, and that was a phenomenon that just swept the country. And Canada is not exactly known as the land of excitement, and romance. But he swept it in 1 year. He went from an obscure member of Parliament to Prime Minister.
All right.
I think Obama is right. If I could just add one point.
Very quickly.
Obama is running on, and his appeal is he's running on a non sequitur, and that is he is a man who transcends race. His candidacy transcends a race. His presidency would transcend race, and race is the most divisive issue in all of American history. The non sequitur is, therefore, there is an assumption, as he promises he will bring us all together and transcend ideology and party and policy. There's not the slightest shred of evidence that in his career in the Senate he did any of that. If anything, it's McCain who reached across on the Gang of Seven, which was a judicial compromise, who reached across on immigration. Obama was hiding in the weeds, and who reached across on a host of other issues in which McCain risked the wrath of his party, and Obama went the conventional way of his. But I think the appeal that Obama has is extremely strong, and I think it follows from a sense that if he's a man who transcends race, which is an extremely important issue in our lives and our history, he will therefore bring us together on all of these insoluble, difficult ideological issues. And I'm not sure it follows, but it's certainly working thus far.
By the way, for the record, I grew up in the U.S., but I am proudly part of the Canadian diaspora, having grown up a French Canadian in New England. So Charles and I are among two people in the city who actually enjoy talking about Canadian politics periodically.
And we could carry on for an hour on Canadian politics.
Well, you know what? We won't. I grew up. You can sit down. You can sit down, too, because we have no more time for you. I know you had a brilliant question, but we're going to wrap it up because the clock is ticking, and I've gotten the cutoff point. But a quick question to all of our panel before we go. This is a law school. This is a premier law school, one of the best in the United States. I don't know about Canada. But it's an excellent law school, and we're all proud to be here. And we're only a few blocks away from the United States Supreme Court. So let's start with Ramesh this time and ask this question. John McCain is a conservative. He says he would appoint Supreme Court justices, nominate Supreme Court justices who are sort of like Samuel Alito or John Roberts in that vein. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama have a different point of view. How big of an issue will the U.S. Supreme Court be in this election, where there are significant differences between these candidates?
Well, I tend to think that although, of course, the courts actually handle a lot of things besides social issues, that politically it tends to be subsumed under the social issues, and so you're going to have the same old division. It'll be primarily a matter of mobilizing the activists and the base on both sides. It won't be so much something that the candidates are campaigning on with respect to swing voters, but it'll be a prominent issue, and it's certainly the type of thing that will motivate a lot of the activists on both sides.
Maralee?
Well, yeah, I had mentioned that before, and the differences that I thought the court could play out a role. I think it may not be quite the drama of the last election when there was this huge, all these ballot initiatives and all the talk about gay marriage, and partial birth abortion was a much more prominent issue. But I do think it will be a mobilizing issue because we've got the court is going to, the liberals on the court will not be there. Some of them.
There are going to be vacancies in the next several years,
yes.
And whoever is the next president will have a say on this U.S. Supreme Court for 20, 30, or 40 years. Charles?
I would agree. I think it does get subsumed in the debate on social issues. But since you raised Supreme Court, I just want to float and announce here my dream Republican ticket, which is McCain-Scalia. Now, wouldn't that
would be fun.
Wouldn't that be a treat?
There were so many good columns there.
Only he doesn't have to resign.
First of all, the fact that the longevity of the liberals on the court is so extraordinary, it makes me think God may actually be a liberal. But that I think the Roberts and Alito choices proved to be so consequential that the Supreme Court will be a bigger issue than usual, but will still not be the dominant, anything like the dominant issue in the election.
Yeah. In a close election, every issue matters, and I think this is going to be a close election. So
you do think it's going to be a close election?
I do. Yeah.
Does everybody think it's going to be a close election?
No. If McCain wins, it'll be a close election. If Obama wins, it'll be a landslide.
Yeah.
And finally, very quickly, because all of you are journalists, excellent journalists, does Hillary Clinton have a point when she says the media have been unfair to her and have been in bed with Barack Obama?
Absolutely.
Yes, I think so.
I think so, too.
Yes,
I think people just haven't looked closely enough at Obama.
In bed, maybe.
In the tank.
Well, that's maybe, dipping into the tank. Into the tank, but definitely unfair to her.
I think
he's given her detractor stuff to work with, too.
Yeah.
I think on some of the cable shows, not necessarily with the best political team on television, there has been a certain open hostility to her. On the other hand, it was the media that reported the present votes. I think that was a New York Times story. It was the media that reported on Resco, the guy who got him into some trouble because of his land deal, and that there were a lot of old Clinton stories that were not resurrected in this campaign that could have been. So while I do think there is residual hostility to the Clintons, I don't think they make all that up. I don't think it's an excuse for why this happened. And incidentally, we have to remember how contingent these things are. If Bill Clinton had campaigned differently in South Carolina, we might be having a different conversation here. And I think one cannot overlook how important certain events are. And at least in my mind, that South Carolina campaign may have been decisive.
I would say I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's a fascinating subject, but it's really about media dynamics and how things work. In Clinton's case, she just gives you so much to work with. And in Obama's case, he's a pretty blank slate, and you have to actively go out and find more things. I think if he gets the nomination, you're going to find out a lot more things about Obama, which may be good or bad from a.
The press is going to have the two nominees at most favored in each party. Yeah.
What do you think?
Given her history, I think the the notion that she finds the press in bed with her opponent is an unfortunate turn of phrase. But I think the reason, I think I just lost the audience.
But what do you think on the substance of the question, though? Has the media been fair?
It is, of course, undeniable that the media has been in a Obama swoon. It's self-confessed. I wrote a column a couple of weeks ago about, and I had a list of liberals who wrote about how they had been, who were sort of reconsidering the cult of Obama, and particularly watching how it has made people uncritical. So I think it's not so much anti-Hillary, it's that they have been sort of impressed and swept away by this new phenomenon.
All right, and then the final question, and then all of you can leave. The final question is, and we'll start with Ramesh once again, is do you agree with the ombudsman, the public editor of the New York Times, that story they wrote about John McCain and his alleged relationship with a female lobbyist was sloppy journalism?
They didn't have the goods. If they had something, then it might have been a legitimate story. But if they didn't have things they were willing to report on the record, then they shouldn't have run that story.
I did not admire the story.
It was scandalous.
I agree with both halves
story.
of what. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, you're going to continue.
The story and not the alleged event. I mean, it was a third-order rumor put on the front page of an affair, and that's not something that you do.
See, I think I agree with both halves of what the ombudsman said, which is it was a good story buried under a sex scandal that shouldn't have been reported because there was no clear sex scandal. And that I actually think it was beneficial to McCain that the sex was in the second paragraph when they had no proof. And in fact, if you read the Washington Post story, and I don't say this because I work for the Post, I was actually surprised when I sat down and reread both stories about 6 times each to try to sort this out. The Post story talked about the relationship with a lobbyist and basically said McCain has this image, in many ways earned, of a clean guy who fought lobbyists. Let's look at his relationship with some lobbyists and what he did in response to lobbying. You didn't need the sexual element, and the sexual element was a mistake.
But the basic difference, hold on a second, the basic difference between the New York Times story and the Washington Post story was that the Washington Post story talked about relationships with lobbyists and writing letters and telecommunications,
exactly,
but never, ever alluded to a sexual relationship.
No, and that's my point, is I think that's exactly my point.
That's a big difference.
I think the sex should not have been in there.
Didn't have it, from what, I mean, I'm not on the political staff anymore, but from what I understand is that we heard about the Times story in December. They were chasing all of the rumors, the woman rumors, and in the end, we never had sources talk to us, as far as I understand, about that issue. And I'm not sure that if we did, we wouldn't have done the same thing.
It read like a sex story that was embarrassed of itself, and so threw in a little lobbying to,
It went through 12 rewrites. And having been on the surgical side of a number of those atrocities, I can tell you that's all you need to know in journalism. I mean, it was just a completely ruined enterprise from start to finish. You could see the seams.
I got to say, I hate sex stories about politicians, and I have scars to show it because I'm about the only liberal you'll ever meet who said, let's not give David Vitter a lot of grief. And so I just don't think sexuality, a politician's sexual life should be a matter of public concern unless there is a clear link to a public issue. And I think that's why if they had left out those paragraphs, had written the story in a different way, as the Post suggested, you could have a decent story there. But that didn't belong there.
But it would have been on page. It would have been on page A16 instead of on the front page.
I want to tell you though how things have changed over the last 8 years. When I was political editor, I maybe got this call in '99, early 2000. I got a call that John McCain, that there was someone had said there's a woman frequenting his house. We think she works for him. It's when Cindy's in Arizona and he's in. So, I got, yuck, I hate these calls. But I did what I was supposed to do. I walked into Leonard Downey's office as the executive editor of the Post, and I said, okay, I got this call. And he said, if we hear more about it, but there was just nothing. And now that same sort of phone calls, I think, triggered this story. I see the difference where journalism has gone in these 8 years.
So stay with the law, kids.
All right. On that note, we're going to end this, but I'm going to ask all of you to be honest. Did you learn something over the past hour and a half? If you did, raise your hand. Okay.
What a generous audience.
The one conservative here, he said no, nothing. All right. Thank you very much.
He works for me. I've never seen him in my life.
Really?
No, never.